Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, and the first last. If you saw on the screen there, we are going over Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. And that was on the reading for yesterday. As I was reading through this parable, I was also reminded of Matthew chapter 9, verse 37, when he said that the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Looking through this parable, we see how what is being described is that the situation of a vineyard, harvest has come, this vineyard needs more workers. And so because the harvest has come and the vineyard needs extra support to help reap in the fruit of the field, the master of that vineyard goes out in search of help. The extra help needed would be above and beyond the regular staff of the vineyard. These regular staff, they couldn't possibly take in the harvest by themselves. So the regular staff in the vineyard work, or the kingdom work, is the pastor and the church staff. The success of the harvest, however, is not because of the quality of grapes, in this case with the vineyard, or the amount of grapes. The significance of the harvest is only due in relation to those who can reap the harvest. You can have a field full of fresh, the best choice fruits, but if there's no one there to pluck the fruits, you really just have a field of rotten fruit, don't you? The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Remember, the kingdom of heaven is like this parable. And so for a clearer understanding, the landowner, or the master of the house, and God are depicted as the same individual. The same as the foreman and Jesus. And the workers, they are all those who are called to salvation by God. The landowner is in search for those who are ready to work. And so, like I have said before, we have to ask ourselves certain questions as we're reading along. Don't just read it word for word, get through it, and then you're done and say, I've done my due diligence, I'm good. Ask yourself some key questions. Who is it that would be hired by the master? Well, just doing a real quick little study, we can find out that he would be hiring day laborers. These are individuals. Contextually, during that time, they're individuals who didn't have a consistent source of income. Someone who most likely was unskilled as to the daily operations that the vineyard would require. A day laborer would be someone who would get up, dress themselves, and go to the market square and stand in line with others, waiting, just hoping to be chosen by a master. A day laborer would have been someone who would be dependent on whatever he could earn in that day to feed his family. This understanding helps us appreciate better the Lord's Prayer, where it says, "Give us this day our daily bread." The concept of a day laborer is not a new one to the hearers of this parable. If we went back to Deuteronomy 24:15, we would be reading an account that refers to the pay of day laborers. It says, "You shall give him his wage on the same day, before the sun sets, for he is poor and counts on it, lest he cry against you to the Lord and be guilty of sin." You see, day laborers could easily have been taken advantage of. They represented a demographic of society who was not the well-off. And in many ways, a day laborer was even worse than a slave. Just think about it. A slave could wake up in the home and realize, well, I didn't pay for this home I just woke up in. A day laborer would not have that benefit. A slave could know that he was getting food to prepare for himself and his family. A day laborer wouldn't have that comfort. A day laborer was worried about the mortgage, how his kids were going to be fed, and how the bills were going to be paid, how he was going to make it to the next day. A day laborer sounded more and more like the average American. Or maybe just my bit of America. As we look into this parable, it's important for us to remember whom the vineyard owner is going out to hire. It's also important to take notice of the needs that are expressed here in this parable. The first need is the need of the vineyard owner. He needs workers to harvest the fruit of the vine. The second need is the need of the laborers to work. But when comparing the needs to one another, the need of the worker far exceeds the need of the vineyard owner. The master, the vineyard owner, has workers and is in a place where his business, his work, is going very, very well. And he needs to hire more workers to handle the fruit of his labor. That's what we would say is a good problem, wouldn't we? As a wealthy landowner, he can do as he wishes, whenever he wishes, whatever he wants to do, that's afforded to him. Now, contrasting the need of the master with the need of the laborers, that makes for a different story. The workers have needs that are not being met. They are day laborers for some reason. Either that they never learned a trade for themselves, a skill. Maybe they were fired for some reason. Or that they were weak or too old. But unlike the master who could meet his need and find workers, they could not find work. They were at the mercy of a master. And unlike the master of this parable, they needed someone to show mercy. And the master of this parable, God, is indeed showing mercy by hiring them. So the next big question for the laborers the next big need for the laborers is their need for a wage. Verse 2 of our parable, after agreeing with the laborer for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. The wage reference here in Scripture, a denarius, it's not given much attention. However, the disciples and the people of the day, upon hearing how much the workers would be getting paid, would have captured their attention. So I'm going to ask everybody if you would participate in a little sermon illustration here with me. Please open up your wallets and your purses right now. And if you could pull out for me a denarius, would you please stand up and bring it to me? So go ahead and do that. I'll wait. Anybody? Are you worried I'm going to take your denarius away from you? No, see, that's the point. We don't know what a denarius is. We don't have them, right? So if we don't know what it is, it's just going to take a little bit of study and we're going to find out. And there's a key importance to understanding the value of a denarius. If we can go on to the next slide, we've got Tiberius Denarius here. And he is the Caesar. He is the one over this time. This is about the coin. I don't know if it was the coin that the workers received, but it was a coin very much like it. And you can see how worn out it is. Imagine how many hands it's been through. But this was a denarius of this day that the parable was told. And we know that in that day, even a skilled tradesman would consider a wage of 1 denarius to be a very good, very generous pay for a day's work. So unlike a skilled worker, especially a day laborer, they would have never made a denarius for a day's wage. To be a Roman soldier was considered to be one of the highest paid positions. They were paid very well, and they received only a denarius a day. Another perspective for the value of a denarius is found in Mark 12:41 through 42. From the courts of the Gentiles where he conducted his public teaching, Jesus entered the court of the woman. And against the wall of the court there were 13 trumpet-shaped collection receptacles for receiving worshippers' free will offerings. these contributions, they were collected there. So from the vantage point, he was sitting directly opposite one of these receptacles. Jesus was observing how the Passover crowd was putting their money into this temple treasury. Mark talks about the coins of all kinds: silver, gold, bronze, copper. But one unnamed poor widow gave 2 lepta, was the coin's name. A lepton was a small bronze Jewish coin that was in circulation in Palestine. 2 lepta, 2 of them, were worth 1/64th of a Roman denarius, which is a day's pay for a laborer in that time. And Mark, he relates to his Roman readers by saying a fraction of a penny, because they would have understood. So now also we have an understanding as to Judas. Judas accepted 30 shekels, remember? These 30 shekels would have equivalated to 120 denarii. So when the master came to the workers and offered them work, then on top of that offered to pay them a denarius, I'm pretty convinced that they would have jumped at the opportunity. So getting back into our parable and looking at verses 4 and 5, we read, "And to them he said, 'You go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you.' So they went, going out again about the 6th hour, and the 9th hour he did the same." So just a side note here, this is a freebie. The master in the parable didn't say whatever is fair. What did he say? Whatever is right. All too often today, our culture is so fixated on what is fair and not on what is right. William Shakespeare is remembered here for a quote. He said, "I like not fair terms and a villain's mind." Connecting a villain's mind with, "Oh, but that's not fair." Usually when we hear of someone saying that we need to make policy changes on the basis of being fair to everyone, usually there's a not right agenda in his back pocket. So getting back to our parable here, thanks for that little soapbox. I was able to stand on there. But who here, show of hands, who here has ever accepted a job offer? Edwy, did you? Yeah. So before you accepted that offer, did you talk about pay? Was money ever brought up? Sure, yeah. Or did you, without first settling on pay, begin the job based solely on the word of the employer that you would be paid whatever is right? No, that's not how greedy America works. The pay structure is usually one of the first things that are well understood about this new position. It is the mark that drives most to advance in their field. People are looking to develop their skills not for the reason of becoming a more well-versed, well-rounded, or efficient employee. It's so that they can reach that next tier of pay. We want higher pay. This further helps us understand the desperate situation of the laborer and what they were in. They would be willing to work for only a chance to make something. Something. Anything. Something can be turned into food. Nothing cannot be eaten. They came with nothing, and without the mercy of the good master, they will leave with nothing. Another little piece of this parable puzzle that I think we moderns have a hard time understanding is when Jesus is referring to the 6th, the 9th, and the 11th hour. And this was based on a 12-hour workday starting at 6 a.m. and ending at 6 p.m. So the 3rd hour, what would that be? 9 a.m. And the 11th hour, 5 p.m., just before quitting time. This understanding helps us when we read verses 6 and 7 of our parable. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing, and he said to them, "Why do you still stand here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." he said to them, "You go into the vineyard too." Another little piece of this parable puzzle that I think we need to know about is the hours. And so the hours, the 11th hour, 5 p.m. The master had just gone out and he gathered individuals to come work his harvest an hour before quitting time. It's really something that's unheard of. You don't just show up to work an hour before you get to go home and expect all to be well when you get there, do you? Going back into Leviticus 19, it says, "You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired worker shall not remain with you all night until the morning." So it's because of this command in Leviticus that we read in our parable, verse 8, continuing on, "And when evening came to the owner of the vineyard, he said to his foreman, 'Call the laborers and pay them their wage, beginning with the last up to the first.'" You see, the master is good. The master is right in his ways. And God is good, and surely God is right in all of his ways. God is looking for workers. The worker who is found is simply accepted or hired for his desire to be used. Willingness to work is the only evaluation given when deciding whom to hire. Unlike that of the application process that we go through today for employment, where you must prove your job skills or your work history in order to earn your way, the master is simply looking for a willing servant. Once the worker is found, the master then qualifies him to work in the field with this one command: "You go into the vineyard too." He is not calling the worker to work independently. He's not calling him to do it on their own or by their own strength or according to their own vision. He is calling the workers to work with each other. There was not just one worker out in the field picking grapes. There were workers as a team. We have to understand and develop a mindset that it's for the master that we work, not ourselves and how we think things should be done or how other vineyards are doing it, and that's how we need to do it. We need to work according to the master. Of the workers that were picked, who do you think was the most grateful of them all? We read of workers that were hired in the beginning, in the middle of the day, and at the end of the day. So who do you think would be the most grateful of these worker groups? The end of the day? Probably a little bit of the middle of the day too. And certainly these are all day laborers, so certainly the ones that were hired first were just grateful for help too. But verse 7 gives us the answer following the question given in verse 6. It says, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They respond in 7 by saying, "They said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' He said to them, 'You go into the vineyard too.'" Now remember, this is the 11th hour. No one has hired them yet. Literally, they were there until almost quitting time. They were standing, being passed by, not being picked. It kind of reminds me of gym class. These workers were the last ones to be picked. Perhaps these last men were old, frail. Maybe they were not well liked. Maybe they were the outcasts of the community. Maybe they were sickly. Maybe they were socially awkward. Maybe they were homeless. Maybe whatever. But what's in common with them all is that they were all easily overlooked. And I think in our own way we can all associate with being overlooked in some way, can't we? Maybe I'm the only one. Remember, for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of the house who went out. You go to the vineyard too. The master left his place of wealth, and searched and found those whom no one wanted. Anybody else that tries to tell you that church is only for the respectable and the rich, I'm here to tell you, has never met the master of the house. This reminds me of a story of a homeless man who was strolling through the town and then realized it was Sunday. He wanted to get right with God, so he decided that he ought to go and stop in the nearest church. He ought to see how he could get right with God and how that could be done. Is Tim out there? He's our representation today. He made his way into what happened to be the richest in the town. There he saw a familiar face sitting on the left side of the sanctuary. That's when it hit him. You see, that familiar face was the one who the day before had kicked him out of the coffee shop. So he sure didn't want to sit next to him. So this gentleman made his way over to the left side or the right side. But there also, no matter where he looked, there were condemning stares. He knew he didn't want to sit by those people either. He saw an open seat near the front, so he went down to sit into it. After the service was over, the pastor approached him and said, "I know you haven't been here before, but this is the house of God. I want you to leave here and this next week ask God how you should dress when you come into His house." So the man, very discouraged, went away. And during the week, the man did do as the pastor told him. And he did ask God how he should dress if he were to walk into that church again. A few days went by, and he came back the next Sunday, took his seat near the front while the pastor was preaching. He was still wearing his same clothes as the week before. The pastor, again, after service, approached him with a disgusted look on his face. The pastor said, Didn't you do what I told you to do? Didn't you ask God how you should dress when you come into His house?" "Yes, sir," the man said. "Well," the pastor said, "what did He say?" The man said, "I asked God what I should wear when I come into your church." "And?" the pastor said. The homeless man said, "Well, God said, son, I don't know what you should wear. I left that building a long time ago. That place is not my house, and those people, they are not my people. Let me lead you to where my people are. They will accept you just as you are, for I accept you just as you are." Friends, our parable's not over. There are still a few verses. Looking in your Bibles, you can read along verse 10. This is talking about the workers. This is talking about those who were called, who were accepted to work in the vineyard. And it's talking about their behavior. Starting up in 10. "Now, when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, 'These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat.' But he replied to one of them, 'Friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to the last worker as I have given to you.'" Evaluating their responses, that first worker's response, it reminded me of a couple of sins. There's the sin of stealing, and there's the sin of vandalism. The sin of vandalism, however, is worse than the sin of theft for this reason. The sin of vandalism says, I don't want you to have what I can't have, so I'm going to ruin, I'm going to devalue what you have because I want to make you more like me. I'm miserable. The sin of stealing just says, hey, I want what you have, so they go and get it. But see, it's It's in this sin of vandalism that I think the first was responding. He didn't want the last worker to have something more than him. So he petitioned and went to the one who gives it freely and said, I don't think that's right. I don't want him to have what I can't have. Or I don't want him to work as little as he worked and get the same amount as I worked. He was really trying to vandalize the body. Us workers in our vineyard, we do the same kind of stubborn, selfish pouting when we withhold our testimony and our witness from those who desperately need the same grace we have received. Matthew 9:37, then he said to the disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And then in 38 it says, pray to the Lord of the harvest that he should send out workers. The only way we will finally and fully have an understanding is when we know that we're working for the Master, not for ourselves. We need to understand that we need to work without complaining, especially of what others are making. Realize your own payment is right, and it is good. It's very interesting that this past week to hear about all the lottery going on. I've never heard of one person that said if they would win the $1.5 billion, that they would share it equally with everyone. I have heard of, hey, if you like my comment on Facebook, I'll give you $10,000 if I win. But that's not equal sharing, is it? We somehow believe that the thing given to us, like grace, is something that we deserve, or something not to be shared with others. It's ours. We almost become pride of our blessing, without the thought that possibly that blessing, these blessings, they're to be used to meet the needs of those around us. You know, there's not one, in this parable, there's not one laborer who was out in the vineyard picking grapes for himself. He was picking it for other people.